Welcome to the Personal Development Mastery Podcast. I'm 𝘁𝗁𝗄𝘆 and my mission is to inspire you to grow, stand out, and take action towards the next level of your life. I interview leaders, authors, successful entrepreneurs, spiritual teachers, exceptional people who will inspire you to improve your life. Tune in for 2 episodes each week and make sure you subscribe to get them as soon as they are released. In today's show, it is my real pleasure to speak with Sébastien Fouillade. Sébastien, you are a product leader at Microsoft, an entrepreneur at heart, and you have been involved with spiritual work for 10 years now and with psychedelics for over 6. During your spiritual journey, you discovered that psychedelics allowed you to go deep, but you kept your new self away from your corporate identity due to the stigma of psychedelics. Eventually, you came out of the spiritual closet, as you say, freeing your authentic self, and you are now on a mission to remove the stigma associated with psychedelics and to inspire people to find their authentic selves. Sébastien, it's a real delight and a joy to be speaking with you today. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, 𝘁. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here and to follow my mission and my calling.
And it is a topic that I find intriguing myself. I have a personal fascination with it. So I'm very much looking forward to listening to your views. Let's start though, before we go here, let's go back and start with some bit of your journey, or your story. So can you... So I want to go back to just before you started your spiritual journey 10 years ago, when you say. So can you take us back there and paint a picture of who you were, what were you doing before you had that moment of transformation?
Yeah, I mean, I was a typical entrepreneur at the time, an engineer. I love to create companies and software and product. My whole background was in engineering. And what's interesting is actually, if I go further back, I also loved art a lot, but I had to choose when I went to college between art school and engineering school. And my family really pushed me for engineering because we had a lot of artists in our family. And they were what you'd call starving artists. And it was really hard for them. So it's like, go to engineering school. So I went to engineering school and I got really busy for many years, being a good engineer, starting companies, joining companies. And I kind of buried that part of myself during that time. And about 10 years ago now, I decided to do a startup to help families reconnect with nature, to help them get their kids off the couch, go do scavenger hunts outside. Because when I came to the Pacific Northwest, where Microsoft is, I saw a lot of parents were just giving the phones to their kids as babysitters. Yes. And that drove me crazy. I was like, this is not natural. This is wrong. I need to do something about this. And so while I was doing that startup, in order to cope with the intensity of the startup, I took on yoga. And as part of yoga, I did meditation training. And I also did teacher training to teach yoga. And as part of teacher training, we did some really intense breathwork yoga classes. And it was called Kriya Yoga. And they talk about that in the book, The Autobiography of a Yogi, as a very powerful mode of yoga. And basically for 2 hours, you've got your eyes closed and you do some breath work. And at the end, you do some humming and there's different things involved. When I got to the end of the class and I did the humming part, I left my body. I mean, I literally I felt in 2 places at once. I was in a different room. The room was dark, but it felt like a room. and I saw a symbol on the wall, and it was only about 10 seconds, but I was like, oh my God, all this spiritual stuff is true. And I had tears in my eyes. And that moment really changed my life forever, because before that, I was the engineer who tried to understand how everything works, the why behind everything. I mean, I knew how to build computers, from the microprocessor to the compiler to the code, from the bottom up. This is what I learned in college. And so my reality was very Cartesian. It was like zeros and ones. It's like, it's like I can touch it. It's real. And then all of a sudden I get hit with this. And my mind was like, oh my God. Like all that stuff that I thought was fairy tale, all that stuff that, I thought was just like religion or make-believe or all that. Like it's real. It's another reality. And so it's just a little bit, I hate to say that, like Neo waking up in the Matrix and discovering another world. And so that just started my journey and my quest to learn more and to deepen my understanding of that.
I'm curious about the symbol that you said. You said that you could see a symbol. Did you find out what that symbol was?
It's interesting because I researched it. At the end, I think it actually looked like a very simplified version of two hands in a prayer mode. It was kind of like a one line that curved and had a peak at the top, and it looked like two hands that were put together in a prayer. And it was yellow on a dark background. And so, but I had to write it. So the first thing I did is I grabbed a Post-it in the yoga studio and wrote the symbol, because I had another fear at that time in my life, which was forgetting. I was really afraid of memory and forgetting things, and I don't know why. And the medicine actually helped me come to terms with that. But I didn't like to forget things. I wrote it down right away.
Can I ask you, I have one more question because I'm very curious about this moment. So after you've had this experience, I suppose you shared with the group or your teacher there. Is that, based on what they said, is that something that happens to many people, or was that as an experience it was very unique to you? Or was that something that you had that caused this experience to appear?
I think it happens to some people, because with breath work you can really attain mental states that are similar to the states you can attain with psychedelics. And the breath work that we did was extremely intense, and I went really intense into it. At the time, I was actually using anger to fuel my energy, like, and using that actually just drained me so much and got me into such a state that I think it opened that side of me that actually got me to leave my body. Later on, I found out how to manage my energy better and pulling from a more positive source of energy. But like, it doesn't happen to everybody. I think it's, you get out what you put in those classes and in the breath work. But there's also people who just focus on breath work and out-of-body experiences with breath work and able to have more repeated results. This wasn't the intent of the class necessarily. I feel like I just stumbled on this. Or maybe it just, people would say it appeared when it was meant to appear. Yes. And it did.
And it obviously changed the direction of your life completely afterwards, because you took on this journey, this quest of looking inside and looking into the spiritual development. Can you share briefly what kind of steps you took afterwards, or how did you went on to expand your knowledge of this new awareness that you had?
Yeah. So in parallel, I had also learned transcendental meditation. So I was doing transcendental meditation religiously in parallel and going very deep. Like I was disappearing when I went deep. I was just nowhere. Even if I had an alarm clock next to me, it would not, like I would not hear it. I was gone when I did my sessions, and I would wake up or come out of it 20 minutes exactly after I started my program. But the other thing that happened that was interesting is we have float tanks, which are, I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's basically sensory deprivation tanks where you're just floating in salt water and in complete darkness. So I started doing that because some people had really good experiences with it, where they went back to their childhood and other things happened. And I was curious. So I started that. For me, it actually, maybe because I'm tall and the float tanks tend to be not as tall as I'd like them to be, I didn't go as deep as I went with meditation. So I was like, okay, I tried that. And after I tried float tanks, the other thing that happened is in the state of Washington, cannabis became legal. So I started using cannabis with meditation. So it was more as a tool. And so the first time I used it with meditation, I was like, oh, wow, there's even more there. There's colors, I can go deeper. It's almost like going between dreams, like almost lucid dreaming, but be going to dreams and being awake. And so I did a little bit of that, but there's kind of some side effects of using cannabis, at least for me, that I didn't really like. So, I didn't do that. I mean, I do it on and off, but not too regularly. And so I think takes us to about when I met my wife. And so when I met my wife and we were dating, she was going to the Temple of the Way of Light, which is a retreat center in the jungle of Peru. And I really wanted to go with her, but they were booked. So instead, I went to do ayahuasca ceremonies. So she was going down to the jungle to do ayahuasca ceremonies. I went to do ayahuasca ceremonies.
Has she done it before, or was she going for the first time?
She had done it a couple of times before, but it was not formal. It was with a guy that also helps people do tourism. And
I get it.
So
I was just curious to see her level of experience compared to you.
Yeah.
That's why I asked. No other reason.
Well, we actually did teacher training together, and I think what was good in our relationship is we had similar spiritual foundation in the meditation, the yoga. And so the reason I wanted to go do ayahuasca with her is I wanted to continue to grow that common base together. So because I couldn't join her in the jungle, I actually went to work with Native Americans locally who are allowed to do ayahuasca ceremonies as well as peyote ceremonies. And so at the same time as she was doing ceremonies in the jungle, I was doing ceremonies on the Olympic Peninsula in Washington State. And the first ceremony I had, so now that was 6 years ago, was just amazing. I mean, it was a group of about 60 people around a giant bonfire with the chief and his wife kind of in the center, not the center of the circle, but looking next to the altar, looking at the fire. And you drink the medicine, and about 45 minutes to an hour in, you start feeling its effects. And I was looking at the fire when I started feeling the effects, and the fire started sinking into the ground, and it started breathing like the earth was breathing, like it was a heartbeat, and the sparks of the fire started connecting to the sky. And I had that huge smile, and I was so thankful that I also done all that yoga work before and meditation work, because it kind of all flew very nicely together. And then I left my body, and I was aware that I had left the body, and I met my wife, who was doing ceremonies in the jungle. And this is a great story, because the first lesson I got from ayahuasca, I didn't ask for, and it was very powerful. But I met my wife, and still being an engineer, I wanted to test everything. So I was like, honey, I'm going to give you a number. And when we meet again in person, you'll give me back the number. I want to know if this is real or not. So I give her a number, and the number was 63. And then she was in the jungle for 2 weeks after that. So I couldn't talk to her. So I waited 2 weeks after that. And when she came back from the jungle, I was like, okay, so what's the number? She's like, what number? I'm like, we met and we talked, and she's like, well, I was going through my process. I didn't get a number. I'm like, oh man, like it didn't work. But what's interesting is about a year later, I was looking at an old French photo album of my family when I grew up as a kid. And in the margin of the album, where there were some pictures, I see the numbers 6-3, anniversaire de maman, which means 6-3, mom's birthday. Mm-hmm. Because in France, you write the numbers in the opposite order as in the US. Yes. It's like the day and the month. And what's funny is every year, I up until that point, I knew my mom's birthday was in March, but I kept on forgetting the day. And so the first lesson from the ayahuasca medicine was, do not forget your mother's birthday. Here's your mother's birthday. And that was my first ceremony. And you know what it highlights is so many good things about ayahuasca. Is one is people call ayahuasca mother ayahuasca or grandmother ayahuasca. But there's a very strong feminine side to ayahuasca, and there's also a very strong sense of family when you do those ceremonies. And the other thing it highlights is a lot of time you go in there with a certain intent, mm-hmm. and you get a different lesson from the medicine. Mm-hmm. And for me, that first ceremony, and sometimes you also don't understand the lesson until much later. And so this is what happened in that first ceremony. And then the second one, I saw the birth of our daughter in the fire, the spiritual soul of our daughter coming out, and everybody around the fire was like birthing her, and she was born 2 years later, and it's almost like I had already met her. And so the second ceremony was fantastic, and I was actually really, really blessed with my first few ayahuasca ceremonies. And so, you know, after that, the next year I went to the jungle, and I wanted to follow in the path of my wife and do what she had done. Mm-hmm. And then I got another lesson, which is you shouldn't try to follow her path. You should be here for yourself. Mm-hmm. And that was a hard lesson. But once I got it, kind of halfway through the ceremonies, it really changed everything. So yeah, I mean, I could go on for hours. I got so many lessons. I journal a lot. I've got 2 journals full of teachings.
I want to certainly discuss deeper about ayahuasca and its effects and more things about that. Before we go there, I would like to also discuss that element of your story that you've done all these wonderful things which are very unusual to most people, and then you come back in your day-to-day life with your work and everything, and you have to keep your mouth shut because it is a conversation that is taboo or so can you share your experience in that? How were you feeling, and eventually what tipped the scale and you decided to get out of the spiritual closet, as you said?
Yeah. So 6 years ago, I don't think people were talking about psychedelics as much as they're talking about them now. And so when you come back from a ceremony like this, especially the first one, that really makes you question reality. It makes you question how we've organized our society. It makes you question the importance of what you do every day sometimes, and maybe the rat wheel we're stuck in. It makes you question a lot of that. It's a little bit challenging, and there's different ways to manage that. Some people journal, some people have kind of a buddy person that they either did ceremony with or a friend they can talk to. Some centers provide integration. For me, I journaled, and I came back to I was actually transitioning. So I had a little bit of time to myself. I was transitioning between a startup and Microsoft, and I had a week of buffer, and that was really good. Because I wasn't talking much about it because I had created two different personas. I had created my work persona, which was usually wearing dark colors and was very conservative and serious. And I had my persona at home, which I had to be a dad. I had two boys. I have two boys and a daughter now. And so I never, when I came back, I actually didn't integrate my shift in the highest of the world with my life yet. I knew there was something there, and it was a little bit of a struggle for a while because I continued to do ceremonies, I continued to get lessons, and I think what happened is there was a bigger shift between those two sides of my life, the more square side that I had been living for so many years, and the more spiritual side that was just growing like crazy. And eventually, I think it wasn't until 3 years ago when I went to Peru in the Sacred Valley, and I talk about it in my book, where I did another ceremony, and in that ceremony, I met elders from a tribe called the 𝘁𝗸𝘆𝗀 tribe, and it was in the vision that I met them, and they're like, "No, you need to follow your calling. Like you need to." Be authentic to yourself, and you need to help people, and you need to heal people, and you need to sing. And I was like, whoa, that's a lot. And I'm not ready to go all hippie on that and drop everything that I'm doing and challenge my life and the safety of my family, and because it's a big deal coming out of the spiritual closet when you have kids too, and a family, and you have responsibilities. And I tried to have my cake and eat it too, where I tried to continue on my spiritual path, but also stay in the closet and continue my corporate job. And about a year and a half to 2 years ago, I started getting very depressed. I had brain fog. My motivation was down. It was hard for me to stay focused. it's almost like my subconscious was like trying to slow me down every time I was trying to do my square day job. It's like, what the heck are you doing? You're not doing the right thing. And I think I had another ayahuasca ceremony that made me realize, it's like, dude, like you need to bring everything together. You can't avoid your calling. And it's funny because I had met people in the past and they told me, well, I got this calling and I became a pastor. And I was like, what do they mean by a calling? And it became very clear for me at that point. It's like, no, this is something that you cannot avoid. This is something you're called to. And this is something that if you try to avoid it, your subconscious will pull you back toward it. And this is what was happening. And, you know, I after that, I was like, no, I'm just very open. Like everybody at my work knows what I do. I'm open about it. I've got coworkers that come to me when they have challenges. I lead with the heart and talk with them. Some of them have questions around working with medicine. I help them if I can. And now I try to help on the side psychedelic companies. So it just feels so much more natural and freeing. And honestly, like it really did have to take all that for me to realize how deep of a calling it was.
And that's the thing with the calling. When you embrace it and you follow it, you kind of know that it is the calling.
Yeah, it's a little scary. That's the thing. It's like, it's a little scary because when you open yourself to the calling, the universe answers, and the universe answers in many folds. And it's really been very clear for the last 7 months that I've met so many amazing people. I've gotten so many opportunities to help amazing people. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, wow, like this is what it feels to be free and to be yourself. So, you know, that's another mission that, you know, talking about being authentic, that's something that I really want to help people with is I wouldn't call it finding your calling because I think it might be a little scary to some people, but finding your authentic self, I think, is as important as finding your calling. Mm-hmm. And if you do that, it's very freeing and it actually opens opportunities that you would never think of.
Absolutely. I would like to discuss, Sebastian, about the stigma associated with all this before we actually go into the some more details and things that I really want to ask you. But let's talk about the stigma first. What do you know about it? Why is there such, I will use the word stigma again, but I think it's very accurate. Why do people perceive psychedelics? Obviously, the question could expand to other things as well, but let's limit our conversation now to the psychedelics since we're talking about it. Why is there a stigma in the first place?
Well, there is a very effective war on drugs. And when I say effective, it was effective in creating that stigma, not necessarily effective as far as the results it obtained, but it was effective as creating the stigma. Mm-hmm. When I moved to New York City with my parents in the 90s, I remember the posters in the subway that showed, this is your brain on drugs, and it showed scrambled eggs. Or just say no to drugs. It created a very binary view of the world, which is if it doesn't come from a doctor, it's bad. That was it. And the other one that it created was like, if you do something that doesn't come from a doctor, you're going to overdose and die. That was another one. Or you're a loser. and and so like those were all the different stigmas that were created as part of the war on drugs. And then on top of that, they created a lot of fictional stories about the bad side effects of using some of those medicines. And they still do that. In fact, there's something called 𝘁𝗸𝗀𝗄, and I was listening to a podcast the other day, and there's still active, I hate to use that word, fake news, but in the case of the war on drugs, it's that's probably where some of that started. That's happening, and so that was part of the stigma, and then my parents also got fed that, and so then they kind of raised me with that information. And that built on that. And so I think that was a really bad thing that happened. And also the other thing that it did is it forced people in the closet. It forced very good people, very smart people, very accomplished people in the closet, people that are very public. And, if you look at the influence of psychedelics on society, over the last 70 years, it's ginormous. It's huge. It influenced like the computer revolution. It influenced, you could even argue, space travel. It influenced so much. I mean, art, music, of who we are. And a lot of that, people stayed in the closet. And so like it's really important to give credit where credit is due. And I'm also hoping that moving forward, and you see that more and more as, celebrities are coming out of the closet and talking about their experience. I think, I don't know, it wasn't Lady Gaga, but it was like Billy Ray Cyrus. I think she talked about her ayahuasca experiences recently. I mean, you've got Mike Tyson, who's known to talk about his toad experiences. And it's good. It's got some drawback because now everybody wants to go straight to psychedelics, and you can probably phase into it. You don't have to jump right into it. But that's kind of my experience with the stigma and trying to break it. There's another thing is, if you're also brought up religious, because I grew up Roman Catholic, I think it's very much against those altered states of mind where you can actually have a spiritual, religious experience with God that is not controlled by what I would call a patriarchal organization. And that's considered a bad thing. When I've probably come closer to God than I ever did through my use of medicine, and I've prayed, I've had the most profound prayers in peyote ceremonies, where I finally realized what real open heart prayer is. And I was taught that from Native American prayer circles. And
The thing with religion is that they are very prescriptive or dogmatic of what it is that you can do to reach God. And it usually involves their practices in their space. So, and that's something that... it is what it is. I'm not surprised that church would not condone use of substances, because they would take away some of the church's role that it has established that as intermediate between human and God. So I will leave that out of this conversation. And there was something else when you were saying about the war on drugs. There was obviously it never worked, and the more you put war on something, the more you get more of that back. War was never the answer. And there was one other thing that came to my mind when you were saying that, and actually I was looking at some things earlier on when I was preparing for this conversation, because there are many times in ayahuasca and psychedelics, the term plant medicine is used. So I was looking because, I truly believe that words have power inside that we don't necessarily see. So I want to see the definition of medicine and the definition of drug and see what the difference is. So I just, I didn't do any exotic searching, just the Oxford Dictionary of English, and it says that medicine is a drug or preparation for the treatment or prevention of disease. On the other hand, drug is a medicine or substance which has a physiological effect when ingested or otherwise introduced into the body. So for me, the big difference between the two was the disease part, or the treatment of prevention of disease that the medicine has, whereas the drug is just a substance. So in many ways, really now reading this back to myself as well, the same exact compound, if you want, either natural or chemical or anything, can be used as a drug or as a medicine. So maybe it has to do with the overall intention of using it, and certainly not by whether a doctor prescribes it or not, as you were saying earlier, because that's the dogma of religion has now been, especially nowadays, been substituted by the dogma of science. So science knows the truth. Which part of science and which part of the truth, that's a completely different matter, but it's very dogmatic again. It's either our way or you're wrong and you burn in the fire.
Well, and it's dangerous because that what that stigma does is it actually puts people kind of in the shadows who still use those plant medicine, and it makes it harder for them to seek help if they need help. So, in the US, for example, if someone ingests a substance and they get really sick and they need help because of the stigma, they might be afraid to actually mention what substance they got, which makes it harder to treat them. So that's kind of a side effect of the stigma and the war on drugs. Whereas in other countries, I think it was Amsterdam, where they're more open with that. What I was reading last week is people are very open about the substance they got. The police that's helping them is not there to reprimand them about the substance. They're there to kind of help them back to their house if they got the substance at a festival. So it's a very different approach that is a lot more helpful to people in that case.
Yeah, and it has worked. I'm not a politician, but it looks like that model worked very much. There's no war. There are profits generated by the government and so on. Let's go back then now, Sebastian, after all this sidetracking here then. Let's talk a bit more about then the psychedelics, the plant medicine, and again I will bring a linguistic topic again because I'm Greek, as you know, so immediately the word psychedelic, it is a Greek word, and it has to I was actually looking into to see the proper English translation of how, because I know how it is in Greek, but to transfer it in English, it's better if I use someone else who is a linguist. And they said that basically it means it's soul manifesting, to bring out the soul. That's how I would translate it from Greek. The psyche, which of course in modern terms psyche has more associated with the mind, but in Greek psyche is not the mind, it's the soul. So psychedelic, something that brings out the soul. Let's start by this and really discussing about this as a spiritual experience, really, because that's what I would like to, for the listener, if there is something that I would like them to get out of the conversation, is the spiritual element of this?
Yeah. It brings out, I mean, words are important. And the other thing that's interesting is when you use words, it helps you box some concepts. And it's interesting because one of the things psychedelics do is unbox some concepts. And it's really, I love the use of words because a lot of time it gives somebody something safe to get anchored to in the conversation.
Yes.
And then some of the psychedelic experiences, the words really don't do it justice. You really can't explain what you went through. And talking about freeing the soul, I mean, I can talk about one of the ayahuasca experiences I had as an example. But one experience I had was basically seeing my death in a beautiful way, lying in a field of grass and being reclaimed and pulled back into the earth, and seeing that whole process, that whole cycle, but living it and appreciating it and understanding that we're all connected. It all goes back to nature, and then somehow it creates trees, it creates new humans, new beings, and so it gives you depth of understanding that even using those words, I don't do it justice. I lived that in my experience. Another experience I had, I was able to see the relationship between Mother Earth and us through our lungs. And I was seeing that there was that symbiotic relationship of us breathing the air that comes from all around us. And I could see all those little trees in my lungs created by Mother Nature, because we are, and interacting with that oxygen. And I had that message at that point that we were living the unconditional love of Mother Nature with every breath that we take, and all the harm we do to the planet. It's like we have to remember that it's like there's that love all the time, every breath we take. This is something that's relationship that's developed over, like thousands, millions of years. And those are the kind of spiritual, soul. I don't know if it's the soul at that point, but it's the core, the essence of who you are. You get those experiences and those lessons in a very vivid, experiential way. And for me, it's transformative to the soul.
I hope you enjoyed listening to this first part of the conversation with Sébastien. And if you have, then I can assure you that the second half is even better. Tune in to the next episode, 145, for the remaining of this fascinating conversation. I hope you enjoyed listening. If you have, please share this episode with someone who you think will benefit from it. If you want more inspirational and actionable knowledge, join my Facebook group, Personal Development Mastery. The link is in the show notes, or you can type bit.ly/PDM group. And until next time, stand out, don't fit in,